world is a terrible, awful, disgusting, exhausting, terrifying place. But I think you found this video because you are looking to be a solution. It is exhausting. It is overwhelming. We are being inundated every single day with more and more terrible things. And at this point, at 20 years old, none of the things that are happening in the world right now surprise me. But at 20 years old, what is not happening is that I'm not getting exhausted by it. I'm not becoming drained by it, and I'm not becoming burnt out by it. And that's because I have strategy. I started being involved in organising and activism when I was 11 years old. And I grew up with the feeling of Weltschmerz, of world pain, world grief, world weariness, feeling like the weight of it was all on my shoulders and I had to know how to solve it, and that not enough people cared. In many ways, a lot of those feelings haven't necessarily gone away, but I now have a more strategic approach to not just those feelings, but to what I'm doing about them and what I'm doing about the world that we live in. Strategy can be a really scary word for lots of people to hear, but it's not. Strategy is not just something for movements, for companies, for organizations. It's for the everyday human beings that make them up. Because if you care about the world and if you genuinely want to have some kind of impact, you have to have a plan as to how that's going to happen. It doesn't help us to scream into the void. What helps us is to make an impact, see that impact, feel good about the fact that we had that impact, and do it all over again and much better next time with the learnings that we've absorbed. Welcome to the Aiyana GOODFELLOW show. This is a channel where I help people live life in alignment with their values. And as you'll have guessed, today we are talking about strategy. So, what is strategy? I define strategy as a map towards specific goals driven by specific values using specific skills. You'll notice that I use the word specific 3 times. Strategy equals specific. It is not going to be for everything and it's not going to be for everyone. It's going to be about making sure that you're having as much impact as possible by focusing on the communities, the causes, the focuses that you are actually connected to and that you know and can see how you're going to be able to change things. Therefore, what has radicalized you? What has helped open your eyes to the way the world things are? The things that have helped you find yourself on the left of things and thinking about the world in a radically different way are not necessarily the things that you need to pour your energy into. If we're thinking about strategy, you have to think about the capacities and the competencies that you already have. And those, although everything is interconnected, might not on the surface have anything to do with the thing that opened your eyes. For example, say I was a cisgender woman, which I'm not, even though you probably assumed that. Say I was a cisgender woman and I have become radicalized and opened up my eyes because I am learning about the ways in which trans people are being demonized and discriminated against. I am learning about the oppression of trans people and the LGBTQ+ community for the first time. But to my knowledge, I don't know anything about trans people. I've never, to my knowledge, met a trans person. This is the first time I'm engaging with these people, with this community. And there are things that I can do, right? I can donate, I can go to a march, I can share a post on social media. But those things are meaningless if there is no strategy, if I am not sure what kind of impact I want to have and I'm going to have. And rather than trying to insert myself into a movement and into a community that I have absolutely zero connection to, the more strategic thing is to consider what skills do I already have that I can use to support the overarching values that ground me and drive my life and then drive the things that I want to do in this life to help make other people's lives better. Sometimes in leftist spaces, we have this strange culture where we try and make people feel like they are a bad person for not knowing things. You don't have to know everything. It's not your responsibility to know everything. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have an open mind. That doesn't mean you shouldn't push yourself. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't care about things that exist beyond your specific life bubble on this earth. What it means is that it's okay for you to focus on a few strategic areas in your life where you know you're going to have significant impact. So much of this feeling of I have to carry the world on my shoulders and I have to be responsible for every problem and I have to solve every problem comes from a place of saviorism. Saviorism is the feeling, the action, the behavior, the mindset of needing to save people. It is not your responsibility to save people. You can only be responsible for your own freedom and liberation. You cannot liberate anybody else. You can support them in their own journey. You can be in solidarity with them. But everybody is individually responsible for their own liberation, their own commitment to freedom, their own embodiment of it. The only person that you can and will ever liberate is yourself. And liberation isn't a singular thing. It's going to be something that you do again and again and again. Because the systems and powers that be make it easy to make the shit choices. You're going to have to make the difficult choice, the harder choice, the inconvenient choice of living life in alignment with your values over and over again. And over again, you will be tested to see how committed to those values you really are. Another important thing about strategy is that it is not motivated by emotions. Emotions are really important. I work in mental health. I care about your mental health, and I'm not saying that you should ignore or repress your emotions and your feelings. Definitely don't do that. Please pay attention to them. However, feelings are fleeting. Feelings are not a sustainable boat for you to ride this ride and journey of liberation on. If you're entirely motivated by the grief, the rage, even the hope, you are not creating a pattern of sustainability for yourself and for your organizing and for your commitment to your values, because at some point the grief will end or pause, the rage will dissipate, and the hope will move into some other feeling. And what do you do then? What do you do if you're living your life in cycles of doing everything possible when the world feels super overwhelming, and when those problems aren't trending on social media, going back to life as if nothing has happened, as if everything is normal again? Hey, I'm editing and I just wanted to add some clarification around feelings. Feelings are not the enemy of strategy. Strategy is a more respectful approach to having the feelings that you feel. Rather than feeling the overwhelm, feeling the grief, responding to it, and doing things that don't actually help your body expel those feelings, strategy allows you to respond on a consistent basis and teach your body over time that, yes, I am listening to you. Yes, I am paying attention to how hard and terrible the world is. And this is what I'm doing on a consistent basis to teach you that I can create safety. I can create well-being. I can embody the values that are important to me, to you, to all of us. If you don't employ strategy, and if you're not consistently engaged in work, and by work, I mean things that you do to make this world a better place, you are overwhelming your body when you let yourself feel something because it's just become too much and you have no choice but to feel an overwhelming sense of grief and exhaustion and despair and so on. And then when things go quote unquote back to normal, you essentially repress all of those feelings and teach your body, I'm not listening to you anymore because I need to function like an adult under capitalism. And that is a problem. Feelings and strategy are not enemies. Strategy is the most appropriate way to respond to the feelings that you're having. And means that when you're not having the feelings that tend to propel you and motivate you towards action, that you're not giving up on action entirely, and that you're still able to be consistent and committed to your values. All those feelings that you try and ignore, that you don't like paying attention to, are sitting in your body. and they are going to pull you closer and closer and closer to the pits of burnout and exhaustion. And I've seen it happen to so many people who really care about the world we live in, really want to make a difference. And because they didn't care for themselves, because they didn't build in systems of sustainability, they just exhausted themselves. And they dissociated and disconnected from the values that they held. And this is what strategy can help you with. By the end of this video, you're going to have a clear plan as to how you can go about being more strategic and implementing a personal strategy so that when you do things, when you take action, it doesn't feel meaningless. Feelings are fleeting, but strategy is consistent because strategy is reinforced by committing over and over again, by making the inconvenient but good choices over and over again. And as you engage in this repetition, you build a habit. And as you build a habit, you will see long-term impact, long-term development, and long-term change. All right, let's get into building your strategy. If a strategy is, and I'm going to look at my notes so I get it right, a map achieving to specific goals, driven by specific values, mobilizing specific skills, then let's start with those specific values. Part 1 of building your strategy asks you to consider, what do you value? What do you care about? What is most important to you? And how can you summarize them in, say, 3 maximum words? For example, you might value kindness. You might value intelligence. You might value goodness. You might value empathy. You might value safety. You might value creativity. Once you've got a list of what you value, whittle it down to maybe maximum 3. If you want to do more, you can, but I would find myself getting too deep into this part of the activity. Once you've got your list of values, you'll want to reflect on them and think about, what would a world that embodies these values look like? For example, if I chose the value well-being, what would a world that embodies well-being look like? And you can think about this world or society, or maybe make it more specific to your city or your local area. Think about it on every level. The ways that people would interact with each other, the kind of culture that would exist, the way that streets would look, if we would even have streets. It's important that you let yourself exercise your muscle of imagination and embrace your childishness. Embrace the part of you that people tell us is naive and silly when we imagine a world of freedom for all. Because these things are not impossible, and they exist in little pockets and on little levels all around us if we are able to stop and pay attention to them. Landing on your values and engaging in this dreaming exercise is really important because a strategy is specific. It's going to help you focus on a few things, but that doesn't mean that the world around you stops existing. Ensuring that you are grounded in your values means that you don't end up with a tunnel vision, that you're still connected to the real world events that are happening, that you're still able to care about them, but they might not be the things that you're necessarily focusing your time and energy into. That grounding is essential because all of these systems of oppression that we live under are interconnected, and anything that you choose to do, as in part 3 or specific skills, will possibly have an impact on more than just the specific thing that you're trying to focus on, because you'll be approaching it with values that are wide-arching and holistic. Another reason why I really like grounding myself in values is because it keeps me away from specifying a political, ideological alignment. I'm a very political person, but my politics can be pretty easily summed up as, I believe everyone should have their basic needs met and we should stop destroying the world we live in. Having said that, I'm not a huge fan of personally tying myself to a political ideology. For example, communism or socialism or anarchism. I think there are things to learn from all of these systems, and I think that so much of it is in conversation and up to interpretation. The minute that I saw there were a subgroup of anarchists called anarcho-capitalists, I was like, nah, I'ma head out. I'm not trying to, no. But what I will say is that when I saw that, I realized how much ideology can feel like religion, in that people argue around the specific ways that a text, a book, a theory should be interpreted, what is missing from it, what the person who wrote it was trying to say. And I think the more interesting thing is why and how each of us are interpreting something in the way that we are. It's kind of like poetry. There is no definitive meaning, and you can kind of argue that it says anything as long as linguistically you can analyze it and back it up with something. And rather than arguing about what the specific text says, or arguing about what real socialism is versus what real non-real socialism is, I have felt that it is much more useful and practical and strategic for me to just step away from those conversations, look at the bigger picture, and think of it as poetry, rather than a definitive guide for moving through the world. What things can I pick and choose and interpret from this? And how can I hold myself accountable to the perspective and the system of judgment that's helping me engaging that process of mining and nitpicking and finding different things from different places and pulling them together to make what feels to me like a more complete and personalized ideology or politic. And all of that is rooted in my values. It also means that when I, like all of us, come across things that I don't really know anything about, I have my values to guide me. I might not know a huge amount about this specific thing that's happening in the world, but because I value wellness and I know this specific thing that's happening in the world is clearly undermining that, I know what side I'm on. I know generally where I stand with things. So values can be a really, really great guidance as you navigate through the world, because they are flexible, because they are personable, and because they are relational. And by relational, I mean they're specific to your relationship to them. What wellness means to me is going to be very different to what wellness means to you. You might be hearing that and thinking, what kind of fucking value is that? And that's fine. The point is it's something that's grounding me and anchoring me so that I can show up in the best way possible. And I invite you to do the same. As with anything that I share on this channel, if there are things that you want to take away and learn from, definitely do that. And if there are things that you think are not helpful to you, then leave it, or leave a comment with a question and I will get back to you and maybe even do a video on it. On that note, if there is anything that you already have a question about, please tell me. I would love to answer your question. I would love to hear how the video so far is impacting you and how, once you finished it, it could impact your life. So please do leave a comment. And I do want to take this opportunity to thank myself for creating this video, and also to my producers. It is easy and free to become a producer. All you have to do is like and subscribe. Shout out to the producers. Okay, part 2. That was a shit clap. Let's do that again. Also shit. One more time. No, awful, disgusting. Terrible claps, but it means it's part 2. We've come up with this ideal world. Now we have to choose an element of it. I would really recommend choosing an element of this ideal world or ideal society or ideal city or ideal situation that you feel passionate about, that inspires you, that you care about, something that you already feel connected to. So my value was well-being. I was imagining a world where we center and embody well-being. And an element of that society would be mental health care. Mental health care is a really obvious thing that serves, supports, and should embody well-being in the way that it's structured and organized. We would want it to be reliable. We would want it to be person-centered. We would want it to be culturally competent. We would want it to be flexible to the needs of the people that are using it, and not just a standard box that people get stuffed into. NHS. You can then choose an element of the world that you would be passionate about. For example, what would housing look like? What would our green spaces look like? How would food be grown and distributed? How would our water systems look? You could take something really, really big and huge, or you could choose something really, really small. But remembering the thing that is fundamentals to a strategy is specificity. Specificity, that is the word. I got it correct first time. Be quiet. You know I said it correctly. Leave me alone. Because you're focusing on the specificity, we also want to bring in another second question, which is, what needs to happen today in order for us to get there? So if I'm imagining this world, hi Bob, this is Bob, my teddy. I'm imagining this world where we have a mental health care system that embodies well-being. What are the things that we need to do in order to get here? Well, one of the things that we can do, and I'm choosing one because I'm being specific, is test and prototype new types of mental health care offerings, new kinds of systems on small scales, on local scales, on highly specific scales that we can learn from and then over time scale so that they can support our whole society and our whole world at large. Obviously, that's a huge responsibility. But again, it is not your responsibility nor my responsibility alone. We share it. And that's why we're going to be even more specific. This specific and tangible thing is going to be your specific goal within your strategy. Okay, and that moves us into part 3. Part 3 is where we find your specific skills. Skills in this case could be replaced by resources. It just has to be something tangible that you can put towards or use in the pursuit of your specific goal. So my goal was something we can do on a tangible, small, low scale level to test out, to prototype what mental health care that actually centers well-being could look like. For this part of building your strategy, I offer you just one question. What specific skills do I have to bring me closer to this goal? So in my case, I know that I am a good listener. I know that I'm good at offering emotional support to people. I know that I really enjoy research. I know that I like bringing people together. And therefore, it's very possible for me to bring together a bunch of people, to offer those people emotional support, or to research what emotional support looks like. What would it mean to have lots of people in my local neighborhood, for example, skilled and confident in being able to give emotional support? How would that be a low-level version of embodying well-being in society, of the value of well-being that I have existing in the world in a much more reliable, beautiful, thriving, flourishing way than it currently does? The way that I actually did this in real life was through founding my organization, Neuromancers. I founded Neuromancers when I was 15, and it is a peer-led mental health organization for neurodivergent plus people. And to neuromance, I should explain, means to fall in love with neurodivergence, or to fall in love with the parts of you that society tells us should die and be dead. I mean, basically that is what it means, like that is the theory, but I lost my ability to articulate the end of that sentence, so that's the description you're going to get today. You're welcome. I'm really proud of Neuromancers as an organisation and how I've been able to grow it over the last 5 years and what we've done and what we've been able to achieve. But I am not saying by any means that the way that you need to respond to your values or show up looks like starting an organisation. That is like a very high level way of approaching a strategy, and it's probably not sustainable or necessary, because there very well might be a grassroots organisation in your local area or not that you could learn from doing something similar to what you would imagine an organisation could do if you were going to set up an organisation. But I'm not saying that's necessary. So I'm going to bring back in our example from earlier of the person who is a cisgender woman, not me, who is has been radicalized by the transphobia that she's witnessing, and She's sat here doing this exercise, thinking about the world that she wants to live in, thinking about her values, thinking about her goals, and thinking about her skills. And one of these skills is in understanding UK law. For example, she might be a law student, and while she may not have a connection at all to trans people and the trans community or the LGBT community at large, to her knowledge, what she does have is a knowledge of, say, housing law. And therefore, she creates a little booklet, a little leaflet with some key information about tenants' rights. And she adds her email at the bottom in case people want to get in touch, if they have questions, if they have thoughts, if they have complaints, if they don't want people to send random things into their letterbox. And she posts it around her neighbourhood. This is strategic because this is using an existing skill, and because this is serving her value of safety. Let's say her value is safety. She has a value of safety for everyone. And because she's studying housing law, it's easy for her to think about what would ideal housing look like in a society that centers safety. And she, of course, then has this linked skill of being able to understand housing law. And so she does this strategic thing of sharing this information, and she ends up getting a bunch of emails. Emails with questions, emails with thank yous, emails with please don't put this through my letterbox or anything through my letterbox ever again. But what it teaches her is that there are people in her community that clearly have this challenge that they're dealing with around housing. And so she decides not only to respond to those emails, but to invite everyone to a gathering at her flat, or perhaps in the common area of the block of flats that she lives in, and to talk it through. And it turns out that one of her neighbours is trans, and one of her neighbours is involved in organising around trans rights. And therefore, the thing that radicalised her has not been the thing that she strategically focused on, but meant that she was still able to connect to it because she did something that was in her wheelhouse and that she already had the skills for. I'm giving this example because I want everyone to understand that everything is interconnected. And even if she didn't have a trans neighbour, or she did and they just didn't turn up and she didn't have that conversation with them and get to connect to the movement that radicalised her, the work that she would have done is still a lot more important and interesting and strategic than just donating to a trans organisation. That's not to say that donating, that's not to say that going on a march, that's not to say that posting on social media does nothing, but it is meaningless if you don't have a strategy behind it. What made the work she did and the choice that she made important and useful and strategic was because she spoke to the next few points that I'm going to outline. And these are really important because we've done the high level thinking of mapping out what this strategy could look like. And again, a strategy is a map. It's not a step-by-step guide. You are still responsible for figuring it out, for personalizing it, for researching, for engaging with it. This video is not going to be the be-all end-all of this conversation, and if you comment below with your thoughts, your questions and your ideas, I'm more than happy to expand on anything in this in another video. But your strategy won't be complete if you haven't put it through these few tests. The first thing when you test out your strategy is to think about community. And this is why our example person didn't end up trying to insert herself and involve herself in the trans rights movement when she had zero connection to it. Because if you are not connected to a community, it is often inappropriate for you to try and insert yourself into it when you don't know anything. Again, it's okay not to know things. It's not okay to behave in a saviourist way and to stick yourself into a situation where it doesn't make sense. That's not to say you should only hang around people who are similar to you, or that everyone who cares about something has to have a personal connection to it. It's about holding yourself accountable, making sure that you don't fall into saviorism, and making sure that what you're doing is appropriate to who you are, the skills you have, and the connections that you have. The second thing that's important when testing your strategy is accountability, and this is related to community. When you are outlining your strategy, you have to consider and ask yourself the question, who and what am I accountable to? There is no point having a strategy if you can't have a feedback loop, because that is how you test your impact and how you iterate and improve your work. I'm going to do a video on accountability, so if there are specific things you would like me to include in that video, please do leave a comment, and when it's out it will be in the description of this video too, so I won't go super in depth, but what I will say is that accountability requires relationship. The third test of your strategy and the appropriateness of your strategy is thinking about landscape and lineage. Whatever it is that you want to jump into, whatever skill it is that you want to build or use, there will be people who have done a similar thing before and are probably doing a similar thing now. It might not be happening in your part of the world, it might not be happening in your city, in your town, in your village, but it will happen. And it's worth trying to do your due diligence and do a fair amount of research to learn about the history, the lineage of people who have already done this work or engaged in this work to some level, and the current landscape of what that looks like in the world today. Again, you don't have to know everything, you don't have to have all the answers, you don't have to have read all of the books to do things, but it is important and appropriate for you to do a level of research so that you're not coming in and wasting your time by making mistakes that people have already made and learned from, and open source that learning so that you don't make those mistakes. So your questions here are, what is the landscape that this strategy is going to be part of? And what is the work that my work is going to be building upon? Test number 6 for your strategy is commitment. As I mentioned before, strategy is something that we want to be committed to, is something that we want to be engaged with on a consistent basis. It is a high level and long-term way of thinking about the way in which you move through the world, one that is driven by your values and not just by your emotions. That means that if you want to build this as a habit, it has to be at first relatively easy enough that you're going to commit to it. You can make it harder and more challenging and push yourself and push your privilege as time goes on, and you can build those check-in points through your strategy. But it is important to know at first and to question how I'm going to be committed to this and what could be the barriers to me committing to this. And considering what those barriers are, what am I going to do to lessen them as much as possible? Not every barrier to you committing to something will be in your control. For example, if you are dealing with chronic illness like I do, if you are disabled like I am, if you're neurodivergent like I am, or if there are other things happening in your life that are outside of your control, you might just have to accept that it's there, and you might not necessarily have a plan in terms of approaching it. But if it is something within your control, for example, if you have a habit of watching random unhelpful things on YouTube, or doom scrolling, or wasting your time binging stuff on Netflix, maybe you can think about protecting that time so you can dedicate it towards your strategy, and so that you can be engaged in a pattern of commitment and build that habit so that you don't even have to think about it anymore and it becomes a part of your life. There are 2 more tests of your strategy, and these 2 are super interconnected, and I think my favorite because they are the most practical. The impact test is about making sure you have systems in place where you can measure the impact of your strategic work. How are you knowing that it's having the desired impact? How are you knowing when it's not having the desired impact? This is also tied to the point about accountability, the point about connection, because if you're doing something in a communal space, in a community way, in a way that's serving other people, which it probably is, those people are probably going to be the people that you hold yourself accountable to, and those people are going to be the people who are going to help you measure your impact. It's really important that you are consistently considering the impact of your work, because that is what differentiates a strategy from a plan. A plan is like, I'm going to do this, and it's kind of loose, and a strategy is hyper-specific and measurable. The last one is time, and this links to impact because it offers you a container to have a look at and measure that impact in a practical way. So questions you're going to ask yourself are, when do I expect to see results? What is the time container for the strategy? i.e., how long am I going to give this strategy? Not all strategies need to last your whole life. If your specific goal is something that's going to happen in 2 months and you're working towards it, and then after those 2 months is over, you'll need to come up with a different strategy for whatever goal is up next. And your last question is, when will I review it? i.e., when will I review the strategy and make sure that it's working? When during the strategy am I going to book in for myself check-in points to make sure that it's having the strategic impact that I intend it to have? Your strategy will grow and change and develop with you, and it should. So it's important that you have those check-in points and those systems that can ensure that the work that you're doing is measurable. Something that's really essential to note about strategy is that it's not perfect. The point is that it's alive. You will make mistakes with it. You will do something and think it's going to be the best, most impactful thing ever, and you'll get crickets, or you'll get someone telling you that actually it was a little bit harmful. And that's okay. It's not ideal, but it's going to give you an opportunity to learn, to redesign, and to hone your strategy, and to be sure that the impact that you're having is useful, measurable, and clear to you and to the people around you. If you're organizing and your actions in response to the terrible things in the world are driven by emotions, then that's all you're going to get. You're going to get wrapped up in your emotions and your feelings. You're going to get bogged down by them and weighed down by them and burnt out by them. If your way of approaching the things that you want to do in the world to create change is driven by strategy, what you're going to see is evidence of that change. That is going to improve your mental health, it's going to make you happier, and it's going to make it clear to others what they can do to be aligned with you in your values and in the things that you care about and in the causes that you want to support. Strategy is what bridges the world that we live in right now versus the world that we deserve, the world that we dreamt of in the activity a few minutes ago. Without strategy, we are at risk. We are likely to confuse movement for progress. We are likely to accept bare minimum from systems that are doling out just enough to keep us satisfied. We are likely to get caught up in celebrityism rather than what impacts are being had on the material lives of everyday people. I created this video for all the people out there that I see, like myself a few years ago, posting on social media, posting into the void, posting into the echo chamber, hoping that's making a difference and not really knowing that it is, and also getting dragged down into watching a bunch of videos and seeing a bunch of posts about super depressing things and just absorbing the opinions of other people, disengaging their critical thinking skills, and wasting what is an incredibly intelligent human brain and wonderful life full of so many skills and things that can be used in a strategic way that are going to be helpful to you and those around you. But some people might disagree with me. Some people might see strategy and think that it's a waste of time. Think that I am trying to encourage people to have everything prepared and then jump in the pool of doing stuff. Some people believe that you should just do something, anything, even if you're not prepared for it. The philosophy that doing something is often better than doing nothing is true and applies in a lot of scenarios. For example, if you're somebody that's struggling with depression, if all you can manage is brushing your teeth rather than having a full shower, that's better than not having left your bed at all. If you struggle with consistently eating food, eating something is better than not having anything to eat all day. That makes sense. Everybody has to start somewhere. But that really applies to examples where people are struggling. Having a strategy is not about struggling, it's about using your privilege. With great privilege comes great responsibility. And if we're using that resource strategically rather than just throwing it around, it's not worth doing anything and everything. If we don't know what the right direction to go in is, we run the risk of causing genuine harm to people. And this is the problem that I see in a lot of people. There are too many of us who are only meeting the moments, who are only taking action when we feel that anger, when we feel that despair, when the violence escalates. But there are too many overlapping problems in this world, too many overlapping moments for one person to meet. Now, strategy doesn't mean that you're only going to be doing strategy. Strategy doesn't mean that you're going to be bulldozing through life and failing to pay attention to or stay connected to the emergent things, good and bad, that are happening around you. You will still be required to meet the moments. And it's often in these times, these moments where people are screaming, do anything. And that's better than nothing. And again, I have my gripes with that. I have my hesitations with that. I think it's important to be responsible with the privilege that you have and to be strategic with the time that you have. But having strategy doesn't mean that you fail to be a responsive human being. In fact, I think strategy makes you better at meeting those moments. When the violence escalates, when the horrors are even more horrifying than usual, your nervous system, your body, your mind will be used to the practice of taking action because you will have been doing it on a consistent basis. You will be used to feeling accomplished, learning, growing, seeing what it means to take impact. And rather than meeting those moments, flailing and screaming and crying and stressed and overwhelmed like you are right now, you'll be able to meet those moments a little bit more strategically. Yes, still as an emergency situation. Yes, as a situation that you might not be as prepared for as you would with the things that are taking up most of your focus. But you'll be able to do it in a safer, more responsible way. I really hope this video on strategy has been helpful for you. Please like and subscribe to become a producer of the show and see more videos from me about how to align your life with your values. And let me know in the comments what you thought.